Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. It's nighttime here. It's late at night, in fact. I'm getting ready for bed, But I'm going to do this show on what I think the world's going to be like in 15. Well, not so much what I think the world's going to be like, but I'm going to kind of focus on North America. What North America is going to be like in about 15 years. Now, we all know Sam Druckenmiller. He said that the United States dollar is going to lose world reserve currency status in probably about 15 years. I think that's going to happen sooner. But that being said, what we're headed toward in the next year or so is inflation. It's unstoppable at this point. We've went like a drunken sailor on a binge, of just constant credit. That's borrowed money. But credit is also debt. And what we've done is we've expanded the monetary supply, and we continue to expand it. And it has to be that way because all of what we call money, which is actually currency, is created through this debt process. And if you try to pay off the debt, well, the money just disappears. That's called deflation. It gets serious enough and enough money disappears, they have to do something, or the system would quite literally implode on itself in a deflationary, basically a default on all of the money. It would just vaporize. Poof, gone. All the fugazi, all the money would disappear. So, what would it look like if the world deflated? Well, humanity wouldn't survive it. A complete deflation. Because everything would stop. Everything in the world, everywhere in the world, runs on this currency that's been created from credit. And all of the currencies of the world are all linked in together now. Basically, the DXY, dollar index, is all the biggest currencies, most powerful ones. If they're not in the dollar index, they're linked into other baskets of currencies, but they basically all exchange in the exchange markets, and it's just the whole thing is just a mess. And if it all goes down, they're all linked into the dollar. The dollar is a world reserve currency, and if it all goes down, they all go down together. They all just basically vanish and disappear in a deflationary debt spiral that can be stopped. The Federal Reserve and the world central banks have the power to stop that from happening. And if it gets bad enough, they will stop it from happening. They're never going to let that happen. Because the world would basically freeze up. The men that are in power would not only lose their positions of power if the world fell apart because everything stopped because there was no money or no credit or no these debt-based currencies. If this game completely stopped, the people in power would lose power because the world would stop, and how do you get it back running again if it actually all comes to a stop? After a certain point in time, chaos would break out everywhere. And, well, I'm talking about now something that is not going to happen, because if it starts to happen, they will freeze the system, and they'll come in and unlock it again with endless amounts of money. Basically, Mario Draghi said it the best when he said, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. We don't really care, basically what he was saying is. Whatever it takes to get the system going and keep it going, we're going to go there. And the Fed, it's the same mentality everywhere you go. And any central bank on earth, the IMF, all of it, they are addicted to money creation, and they have to keep the money creation going in order to keep the system running. The system is what supports them. And if things get bad, they'll get scared and they'll do whatever it takes. Some of the other central bankers have said basically the same thing. Not long ago, Jerome Powell got up and stood before the audience and he said, listen, we can create any amount of money we need to create. Our printing ability is unlimited. What part of that do people not understand? Never underestimate the central banks and their power to create money. Or not money, currency. Anyway, so which way is it going to go? It's definitely got to continue to go with inflation, because what we have is we have these asset bubbles in almost every commodity class and in the housing market. And, well, you can see these bubbles everywhere. Now they call it the everything bubble because it's expanded worldwide. And they have to keep feeding it. They cannot let these bubbles burst. They're too big now. They're all too big to fail. The system's too big to fail. Even cryptocurrencies is getting so now that it's so large that it has an impact on the system when we see a downturn in the price of cryptocurrency. The wealth effect starts to diminish rapidly because a lot of people, the central banks now rely upon this wealth effect to help stimulate the economy. They don't like to see cryptocurrencies fall. If $500 billion is trimmed in 2 days off of cryptocurrencies, that's going to have an impact. Everything has an impact. That means that they're going to have to carry more weight, the central banks. That means that they're going to have to figure out some new angle to get in there and pump more liquidity into the system. That's all it means for them. So at this point, they don't even want to see cryptocurrencies fall. Heaven forbid the stock market fall. Heaven forbid the bond market and the yields start to soar. What are they going to do? They'll have to do yield curve control. So what we're seeing is a system that they cannot let it die. In 2008, it tried to die. And in fact, it did die. But they gave the corpse drugs and stuff to keep it animated. And they have to keep it ever continuing more and more and more to get the same high effect on this medication that they're taking, which is this constant injections of liquidity. And it's going to keep getting worse, and it's going to keep getting worse. And your fiat currencies are going to continue to be worth less and less and less. Now, at a certain point in the future, this is going to have a direct impact on the people. And we're already seeing that during this health crisis. The direct effect upon the people is starting to cause migrations. And we're seeing areas in the system start to get frayed, weakened. Like, look at what happened in Texas with their electrical infrastructure during the storm this winter. People were left with no electricity, gas pumps were closed, the temperature was 30 degrees, I mean, some of their houses don't have insulation because they don't really need it. And they don't really have a heater or whatever. They have trailers and things, because it's generally so hot there. Generally what they have to worry about is heat, and they're ready for that. They got an air conditioner. But with the electricity out, what are they going to do? They got all these space heaters and stuff. They can't even run that. Can't get gas. This is a breakdown in the fabric of what holds society together. And we're seeing it in an area, Texas, when we have a cold snap. Yeah, they got things running now, but it shows weakness in the system. We see the same weakness in the system now with the gas crisis that just occurred on the southeastern United States, where the flow of gas was stopped for a few days to a large areas of the United States, and we've seen panic buying of gas, and everything, right? That's like the effects of the system slowly breaking down, and it's a very slow collapse, is putting stress on people. Everybody's becoming a prepper. It's becoming the fashionable thing to do now, is to prep. There was a time when they looked at preppers and they said, "Oh, well, he's an end of the worlder, and he's different. He's a different kind of guy. Now, all of the friends and neighbors are starting to do it. Everybody's starting to do it. All starting to get prepared because they see something coming. What is this they see coming? Something monstrous coming. And they feel it. They feel that something's coming. And I'll tell you what's coming. What's coming is a monetary crisis, a sovereign debt crisis, a crisis of the currencies. That's what's coming. And this crisis has been a long time coming. It really got started in 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. The American dollar was pegged to gold. All the other currencies of Earth were pegged to the U.S. dollar. And when they cut that cord, they cut that umbilical cord, linking the dollar to gold, then the dollar just started floating free down the river, and all of the other fiat currencies with it. And now, what point have we got to? We've got to the point where we've slowly, basically destroyed the monetary system. Money runs everything on Earth. And so now we're seeing frays in the system start to develop. Now the pressure is going to start to come on the people, because prices are going to go exceedingly high. The rich are going to get much, much richer. This effect is going to continue, this process. And the poor, which make up the majority, is going to get poorer and poorer and harder to feed themselves, harder and harder to stay inside their homes, as prices soar faster than their paychecks go up. Yes, the paychecks are going to go up, but the prices on things are going to go up even faster. And so what happens is people are playing a game of catch-up here. Catch-up in the fact that they can never actually make the two ends meet, and it gets harder every month to make the amount of your paycheck meet the amount of your expenses. So what's going to happen is this fraying over the next few years, or a weakness in the structure of society, is going to manifest itself more and more in anger amongst the people, because they're not able to make the two ends meet every month. Their paycheck isn't big enough to cover the rising cost of expenses. And they'll be looking for a way out. How do we get out of this mess? This is what they'll be thinking. How do we get out of this mess? What are we going to do? How are we going to feed our kids? So then the government's going to come along and start giving out these handouts from the government. But they're going to require you sign this, and dot this dotted line, do this, do that, do something else. Buy your food here. They're even going to tell you what to do with the money. They're going to know where you spend it, because it's probably going to be some sort of electronic payments. You think this is going to solve everything? No, it's not. Because they're going to have to keep increasing the amounts that they give the people. This is not a solving to the problem, because a lot of people are going to fall through the loopholes or cracks, and they're not going to catch up with a lot of people, and the anger is going to grow amongst the people. Then you're going to see this fraying that I've been talking about. In other words, whole parts and sections, most likely urban sections, where people are going to start moving out. We're already seeing it, the front edge of it, starting to happen. Apartments going vacant in the inner cities. The next thing you know, crime will start to increase. More people will want to get out. Then they'll start having power interruptions and things, because the city and the state and the local governments can't pay the the things that they need to pay. They're what's called unfunded liabilities that they have, pensions and everything else. And there's going to be a lot of bankruptcies. And what's going to happen is that's going to further disintegrate the fabric of society in these urban centers, which is going to in turn make more people want to get out. And the people that remain in all these vacant buildings and stuff are going to become nothing more than fire traps. And so there's going to be massive, this is in the next few years, the next 3, 4, 5 years, there's going to be massive movements of people trying to restructure their lives. And all that costs money too, and drives the price of real estate up in rural locations. And there's more people, or just as many people, live in the urban locations as live in the rural areas, even though the rural areas encompass a much broader space. So we're going to see a vacating of the urban areas, moving into the rural areas. But when you double up the population in the rural areas, you start to have problems, and friction starts to develop there as well. So what it's going to lead to in the end is going to lead to whole sections. When the hyperinflation actually starts to have its impact, when we move past the initial phases of the hyperinflation, which is called the acceleration phase, when we move past that, and we're not in 1970 style inflation, but we're in actual hyperinflation, maybe a couple years from now, that's when the real trouble's going to begin. Cities are going to get burnt out. There's going to be whole vast areas that are going to be like uninhabited, really, because, or if there is inhabited, it's going to be like badlands or like wastelands, because the power grid's going to go down in those regions, and they're not going to be able to get it restored. So there's going to be whole large gaps that form. Some of these gaps might be 200 miles from one side of the gap to the other side of the gap, where it's like a wild land, where the law enforcement doesn't even want to go into that region because it's like the Old West. And a lot of people are going to move out of those regions and try to move into regions where new communities are being started, new growth is going on, and they got power, and they got electricity, and they've got... I'm talking like 10 years from now. Now, I've moved further out into this situation. Further out into the hyperinflation, we see the damage and impact that the hyperinflation has had. That's where I'm at talking right now. That's where I'm talking. And that impact is going to be, it's going to create these areas where the grid's going to go down. And the grid might go down just because the people are so angry that it's impossible to enforce civil disobedience on a massive scale in these regions. And once the grid goes down, the people will be unmanageable because of the anger and resentment and of the situation that they're in. They can tear everything to pieces. We've seen this almost start to happen in these riots that occurred just a few months ago. Remember, the cities were burning and stuff? That's going to come back with a vengeance once the hyperinflation hits. And so you're going to have these areas that fall into decay because they can't pay. They're basically all bankrupt. And this is part of what's going to fuel the hyperinflation, is the fact that this bankruptcy of state and local governments and whole wide areas. We saw what happened to Detroit not long ago. The decay that comes from that. But this is going to be worse. This is going to be worse in the fact that they're not going to be able to keep the power on to these regions. We're going to have parts of the grid that are going to go down. So maybe 100 miles away, the power grid might be up. You might have a community that's thriving. and it's going along good, and they've got their technology is advancing, because 10 years from now, our technology level is going to be advancing. Technology is advancing very, very quickly. So you'll have a community that's got the internet, they got the latest everything, high speed, they got like 6G, and they're streaming games and everything else, and they're doing all this stuff, and the world's still going on. Where 50 miles away, you got an area where it's in complete decay and no electricity, no power grid, no anything. And most of the people have moved out. So you'll have almost like zones, and they might even isolate these zones. They might fence them off. The law enforcement might not even go into these zones because it might be lawless, completely lawless. This is what we're moving toward. As they have to restructure things, and things move into this new paradigm where the areas that are up and running and have the internet and stuff are going to start to switch over and going to start to run on electronic currencies. So people will be sending money back and making micropayments over their phone in currencies that aren't necessarily connected to the governments themselves. And these currencies, 10 years or 15 years from now, because we're looking out 15 years, these currencies might actually have a tremendous amount of purchasing power, and people might work for them and everything. And this is going to further enhance the inability of the government to control the system. Because the government currencies will be practically worthless by then. And we'll be still plodding along into this hyperinflationary world that changes are going to come so rapidly in the next 5 to 10 years that it's going to be hard for people to keep up. Well, you saw how much change we've come through since 2019 till now. It's only been like 2 years. Massive amount of changes have happened in the last couple of years. This change is going to continue, and it's going to even pick up pace, because the impact of hyperinflation is going to be 10 times the impact of a pandemic. 10 times the impact, socially, economically, structurally, and it's going to be such an impact that it's going to send parts of our society into utter decay, where we're just not able to support those regions that fall into decay. They're going to have to try to keep the regions that aren't in decay up and running in order to keep the whole system from collapsing. So if you're in one of those regions and you don't know where these regions are going to be, where they're going to pop up, they're probably going to come when the civil unrest starts to occur, when people get pressured hard enough, people get pushed where they feel like they just can't make it any longer. And all of a sudden a spark draws these people together. The spark can be anything. It can be a vest that they have in their cars, It could be just a saying that they have, like that they form into a chant, and all of a sudden the people start to join together under that one saying, or whatever comes along, whatever they see, whatever appeals to them. It just could be some little thing that goes viral on the internet that triggers it. But once it starts, it'll burn like a fire, because the people are ready for that to happen. They're ready for change. As they get pressured by the hyperinflation. Now, we're not there yet. We're a long way from the hyperinflation yet. Probably, probably at the earliest a full year away. But we're going to start experiencing this inflation. You're going to start to see the impacts directly in your life, your purchasing power is going to start to diminish. Corn has went up price by 50%. They don't have enough of these raw commodities to go around. Things like sugar, corn, wheat, potatoes, everything. And then on the other end of the spectrum, when we're looking at commodities like wood, how much has wood went up lately? Are they counting that on their CPI? Of their 2% inflation? Well, now they've upped it. They said 4%. If they're saying 4%, back when they were saying 2%, the real inflation rate was 8%. Now they're saying 4%. Is the real inflation rate 16% right now? I think so. So where are we going with all this? And what's the world going to look like 15 years from now? Well, what we're going to have is we're going to have whole areas that have basically disintegrated into chaos. And the power's going to be out in those areas. And nobody's going to want to live there. People are going to try to get out. And the few people that remain in those regions are basically, it's going to be like living like it was back in the 1800s or so, back in the United States and out in the West. It's going to be Wild West. That's what it's going to be like. Law enforcement won't even go into those regions when this happens. And the people that live in those regions will be able to cope with it. Because people always find a way to cope. They'll find a way to, maybe some of the people will enjoy living in those regions. It'll be right up their alley. It depends on the type of person, So it will be inhabited to a certain degree. There'll be old burnout buildings, and there'll be all kinds of, it'll be just like you see in these movies when you see something that's a post-apocalyptic world. In these regions, you might have to drive 400 miles one way or 200 miles the other way to get out of that region and get into a region where they have lights and they have power and they have all of the things of life that we take for granted. But it'll even be more so because 15 years from now, because that's what we're talking about, technology will have advanced the equivalent, because it's speeding up, The technological advancements we're making are speeding up, and we're getting AI now. And, it wouldn't surprise me if the AI starts to make its own technological advancements faster than the speed of light. So, gosh knows what sort of technology we'll be using 15 years from now. It might be far more advanced than you can imagine. So they'll have it. They'll have the latest and the greatest. Than the places that have power. And maybe just a few miles away is the Badlands, where the people are living like they did hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So it's going to be unusual in that respect, And this effect that we're going to see, that I'm talking about, is going to happen in Europe, and it's going to happen in North America. Those are the places where it's going to be most prevalent, because of the way things are set up, especially in Europe. Europe is particularly bad. They've got a particularly bad case, and the reason why is the euro was never put together properly to begin with, And so it's all related. See, this fraying of society, or this collapse, is all related to the impact of the currencies having when the currencies lose their value. And the reason why they're losing their value is because they're not backed by anything substantial to begin with. And a lot of these countries, they don't have any gold holdings anymore. Take Canada, for instance, country I live in. 0 gold. If you got a guy down the street down there and he's got 1 gram of gold, He's got more than the whole Canadian government. What a foolish thing to get rid of all their gold. And why? Why did they do that? So, 15 years from now, we're going to be moving toward technology that is going to reduce the cost of the technological aspects. See, technology is deflationary because it makes things cheaper if you're dealing with technology. But that deflation only extends as far as the technological things you use. In other words, like electronics haven't went up in price that much, and the things that we pay for, that we use, that are connected to technology are going down cheaper in price. And that is having an impact on costs, but still things that exist in the real world that aren't connected to technology are going up massively fast in price. So that's inflationary. What are we going to do in the end, is you've got to be able to roll with the punches, because in the next 15 years, this is when the big changes are going to occur. Change. And if you're not adaptable to change, then you're going to get left behind. Maybe you should just move out to the wasteland or to the Badlands and live in a van down by the river down out in the Badlands, if you're not adaptable to change. There's going to be people that make out really good in all this. And a lot of these people that are going to make out good are the people that are very adaptable. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next show. Bye-bye.